This is Frank Islam, Chairman and CEO of FI Investment Group and your host of Washington Current Review, where we interview leading voices from business and politics that impact you, the viewer. Today, our guest is Jim Rosapepe. He was a U.S. ambassador to Romania, and he's also a Maryland state senator. And thank you for coming to our show, and thank you for your leadership, and thank you for serving our country.
Oh, well, thank you for inviting me today. It's good to be with you.
You're most welcome. For those in the audience who do not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself and your district that you represent in the state of Maryland.
Sure. I live in College Park, where I've lived for 31 years. I'm in business in Washington, D.C., in the investment business, but I've been in public service for many years, currently in the state Senate representing College Park, Beltsville, Laurel, and Western Anne Arundel County.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about yourself. Beside the fact that
Sure.
you didn't say anything about it being a U.S. ambassador to Romania under the Clinton administration.
Right. I had the opportunity to serve the Clinton administration, serve the people of the United States from 1998 to 2001 as a U.S. ambassador to Romania. My own background is not from that part of the world, but I was born in Italy, so I'm an immigrant from Italy.
First generations?
It's a little complicated because my father was also an immigrant, and he was an American citizen when I was born in Italy. But I was born in Italy, came here, and obviously grew up in the United States. But Romania is a Latin country like Italy. That's why I was making the connection. And Romanian is a Romance language, and I had the opportunity to represent our country at a time when they were making the transition from communism, and before they got into the European Union, before they got into NATO. They made a lot of progress, and it was a real opportunity. The United States made a big difference, and I was honored.
And you made a big difference.
Well,
thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you.
I'm a big fan of education, and this is very important to our country, to our community, and to this administration as well. As a matter of fact, we need to make education more affordable and accessible.
Absolutely.
I know you have been a champion of that in the state of Maryland in the legislations. Tell us a little bit about that. How do we make it more affordable and accessible for the students?
Absolutely. Well, when I came back from Romania, Governor Glendening appointed me to the Board of Regents of the University System of Maryland.
Oh,
and I served there for 5.5 years. And it was during the period of time, frankly, when former Governor Ehrlich made huge cuts to higher education, which drove tuition up 43%. We ended up with the 6th highest tuition of all public universities in the United States. And on the Board of Regents, I led the opposition to those budget cuts, led the opposition to those tuition increases, and continued when I got elected to the state Senate. Governor O'Malley signed on very early to saying we have to get tuition under control. And so for 4 years under Governor O'Malley's leadership, we worked together to freeze tuition. Now we have a cap on tuition of only 3% increases a year. And so Maryland's gone from having the 6th highest tuition in the United States to now we're in the middle range. We've still got a ways to go. We've made huge progress.
You know, one of the things that education produces a leader and makes this country go forward. And people don't seem to realize that how important it is for America, and we have the best institution in the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and we have smart, hardworking people.
No question about that.
The challenge on higher education particularly, we have challenges in K through 12 too, but in higher education is affordability.
Exactly right.
We have to be able to have middle-income people, working-class people, low-income people who have the ability, who have the drive to be able to afford. We don't really have that as we need to in the United States. President Obama's worked on it with expanding the Pell Grants. Governor O'Malley's worked on it with affordability of state institutions. But we still have a long way to go.
I agree with you. Let me just talk a little bit about, since we're in the same topic of education, as I understand, you introduced a legislation with online education, which I think is a very good thing for college and K-12 students. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, Maryland is not as much of a leader as it should be in online education at the K through 12 level. At the college level, we actually are leaders because University of Maryland University College, which is one of the 11 campuses in the University of Maryland system, was one of the pioneers and is today one of the major public online universities in the United States. But at the K through 12 level, we're behind. So one of the things that I did this year in the legislature was sponsor legislation that passed that set up a system for the State Department of Education to be able to review and approve online courses from around the country to make them available to Maryland students. Because one of the beauties of online education is you can teach from anywhere, and learn from anywhere. The teacher doesn't have to be in College Park to teach the student in College Park.
Yeah.
But that's a big change in education because we're used to the neighborhood schoolhouse.
Exactly.
And we do need neighborhood schoolhouses, and we do need children in classrooms with teachers. I'm not saying we don't. But we ought to have the opportunity. There isn't necessarily a Mandarin Chinese teacher available in every community.
Makes sense.
But every community, every student can have access to a Mandarin Chinese teacher online.
You know, it's very important to produce today's students for tomorrow's job. And we need to have the skilled workforce. We have shortage of the skilled workforce. How do we encourage the students to get education in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, which is, I'm very passionate and committed about that because that's my background. What kind of motivation do you give it to them?
Well, I had an interesting experience several years ago when I was interviewing, she was actually an Indian American, very bright student who was graduating from one of our local high schools and was interviewing for a scholarship. And I said, what field do you want to go into?
I'm sure she probably said STEM.
No, she didn't. That's where the story goes. That's where the story goes. She said, I said, what do you think about majoring in school? She said, I'm thinking of majoring in political science.
Science, yeah.
And I said,
was it total departure for South Asian students?
Understandably. But she was very good in science, very good in math, looking at her transcripts. I said, so why are you thinking about majoring in political science? She said, well, I think there are good careers there and I can make a lot of money. And I said, no.
Not in politics.
No, you want to follow STEM, science, and education. I think part of it really is information. I think a lot of people don't really understand the job opportunities in STEM. So I think that's part of it. It's letting the kids know.
No, we have shorted the skilled workforce as a result
Absolutely.
of that. Yeah. Let me just talk a little bit about now the federal health care laws, about the digitization of the medical records.
Yep.
Why is that how is that important in Maryland? And what does it do to make the health care more affordable as well as more cost effective?
Absolutely. I think that's another legislation that I've sponsored. I sponsored the legislation in Maryland that pushed us for digitalization of medical records. We're going to be among the leaders in the United States in that area. Why is it important? Well, the easy way for the average person to understand it is how many times you've gone to a doctor's office and they ask you for the same information over and over and over again.
No question about it.
Everyone's had that experience.
You fill out the same form.
You fill out the same form. That wastes your time, that wastes their time, that wastes everybody's money. Take that to the much bigger level of all the information in the system. It's crazy that our financial records are digitized, but our health records are not digitized. The other piece of it is, it's good for our health. Because again, how many times have you gone and seen a doctor, maybe a doctor that you haven't seen before, maybe in an emergency situation, or maybe referral, and they're like, well, tell me exactly what pills you're taking, tell me what problems you've had. They ought to have all that easy, pull up on the screen. That will lead to fewer medical mistakes. It'll lead to better diagnoses.
Makes it more cost effective.
But it also leads to better treatment. So it's getting more for less instead of getting less for less or more for more.
Well, that's the best way to describe
it.
Exactly. Let's just shift a little bit to talk about, you have been in news recently regarding your proposed constitutional amendment that will allow voters to approve a transportation funding plan.
Right.
How would that work?
Right. Here's the way it would work. The governor and the legislature would come up with proposals to reduce gridlock. You know, we have the worst traffic congestion in the United States in the Washington area. In Baltimore, we have the second worst. It's ridiculous. And the reason we have it is because we've fallen behind in investing in infrastructure. In roads and bridges, in transit, light rail, heavy rail.
Follow the federal government in terms of the federal legislators.
The federal government is behind too, but still there are areas of the United States that have caught up more than Maryland has.
Right.
And so one of the problems is getting a consensus in the legislature to say, look, here's what we're going to do and here's how we're going to pay for it. Other places in the country take that issue to the voters. So this month in Atlanta, Georgia, they're going to have a referendum on paying for expansion of highways and expansion of transit and paying for it with a modest increase in their sales tax. Now, you may like that, you may not like that. That may be the way to do it, may not be the way to do it. But the point is, they're taking the issue to the voters. In Maryland, under our Constitution now, we can't do that. So my constitutional amendment proposed, along with Delegate Brian Feldman from Montgomery County,
I do know him,
would amend the Maryland Constitution to allow the legislature to put together a transportation package, take it to the voters, to be able to do what they can do in Georgia and many other states, to try to end this political gridlock which is causing the traffic gridlock.
What do you think of the inter-county connector that we have in Maryland? People say it's very good because it's not that much traffic, because the reason it's not very traffic, a lot of traffic because it's very expensive.
Absolutely. It's a conundrum.
Exactly.
I mean, it is very quick. I mean, I've driven it a couple of times.
Me too.
And it obviously helps for people who are getting from particular places to particular places. Hopefully, given the investment's been made over time, more and more people will take advantage of it. I think they will. I think
so too. In 2008, you introduced legislation that led to the creation of the Task Force on the Preservation of the Heritage Language Skills.
Right.
Can you explain the motivation for this effort?
Absolutely. Well, part of it was personal. As I said, I was born in Italy. I never learned Italian. But most immigrants to the United States, I came here as an infant. Most young people who come from other countries come with foreign language skills.
Yes.
The parents come with foreign language skills.
No question.
It's one of the great things that immigrants from all countries bring to the United States is language skills. And as folks know who come from immigrant families, the immigrants themselves, the adults, particularly if they're older, sometimes don't really get to learn English. The children, people try to learn English for sure, but some people don't. The children generally will learn some of the heritage language at home, and they'll learn English very well. By the time you get to the grandchildren, they're great at English, but they don't even have the heritage language.
But do they need to have that skill?
Yeah, well, we need it. Whether they need it or not, we as Americans need it. And our point is that it's a huge resource that immigrants bring here that helps our country economically. So we're the first state in the country that set a policy of we want to help immigrant families help preserve the language skills that they brought to this country. So how do you do it?
Tap upon those resources.
Exactly. Well, one way you do it, which we got the policy changed, is now students can get credit in their public schools for demonstrated proficiency in languages that they didn't necessarily learn in the language class in the high school, that they learned at home, that they learned from their grandmother, that they learned in Saturday language classes at their church or their temple. So there are many ways we can help the communities preserve these language skills.
Well, that's a good way to preserve and protect and promote that language.
And help our country.
You know, I'm a fan of small business because I've been entrepreneurs, I've owned small businesses, and I still continue to own several companies.
Well, I'm a small businessman too, so
small business,
I feel the pain.
Yes, a small business has been instrumental in creating a job. 98, you have to be small to win big. 98% of the business in our country, they're responsible for creating a job. What are some small business benefits you have supported? One of the things that they have a problem with, access to the capital. Shed some light on that.
Well, we've done a number of things. Some of them targeted particular industries. We've created biotechnology tax credits to encourage people to invest in smaller biotechnology industries for sure. We also have moved more of our state money into community banks to encourage them to loan to small business. Because the truth is that's where most of the small business lending comes from. Is from the community banks. So when the state has balances to invest, we want to give them an incentive to lend through the community banks.
Well, that's what small business legislation is supposed to do, but it turns out that the community bank really used that money to pretty up their balance sheet.
Well, there's truth.
The smart thing to do, it was the right thing to do, but it didn't work out that way.
No, I understand. Well, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. I mean, it's very fair. You got to keep an eye on folks. There's no question about it. But the reality is that most of the small business lending does come from the smaller banks.
Good.
And this conglomeration of big banks that we've had since the financial crisis has been very bad for small business.
Yes.
And that's why we need to focus on the low. The other thing about the community banks is the people who work, they live in the community.
That's exactly right.
They know the businesses, they know the people, and that's better banking and it's better business.
I agree. We alluded to the fact that you serve as United States Ambassador to Romania.
Yes.
So are you still involved in the foreign affairs?
Yeah, I keep up. I'm on the board of the Council of American Ambassadors, which is the sort of alumni association for former ambassadors.
Right.
And so I keep up to date on these things, and obviously am very supportive of what the Obama administration's been doing and Secretary Clinton have been trying to do in a whole variety of difficult areas around the world, and try to be helpful where I can.
Continue.
Absolutely.
To nourish and cherish some of those experiences that you gained as an ambassador.
Absolutely, because as everybody here knows, and particularly I'm sure most of the people who watch this programming, is America is not an island.
Right.
People may think it's an island. It's not an island. We're very integrated in all kinds of ways with the rest of the world. And so we have to be, not just economically, but culturally and politically engaged. I mean, think of what's going on with the crisis of the euro right now. That's affecting our jobs.
No question about
And
that.
so, obviously,
or the slowdown in Asia, what's going on in terms of the...
No, absolutely. On the flip side of that, obviously, given the growth in Asia, the Maryland has tried to be very active in partnering with growing countries, obviously in India and China and Vietnam and other places, which we need to do, because that's where the growth is. That's where, if we want to be able to export, we've got to export to people who are going to be buying.
No question about that. We need to tap upon those middle class people, and there are plenty of them in Asia. Exactly. Now, one thing before I ask you to basically close your discussion with me, or talk about what lessons can Wall Street learn from the Main Street in terms of the community bank?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you got to manage your risks. I mean, that's really what small business people do every day, is manage your risk. Is the risk your customers aren't going to come in, the risk that your employees are productive, the risk that your suppliers aren't going to apply. And the reality is that when you're small, you're taking the risk, you take the responsibility. What happened on Wall Street was they were playing with other people's money.
Exactly.
And they were expecting the taxpayer to bail them out.
Right, which is exactly what happened.
Exactly, and therefore they took risks that were too big. And it's worse than that. We've seen now these...
But look at JP Morgan Chase. It's a good example to illustrate your point.
No, absolutely. So if they behave more like small business people, taking responsibility for themselves, managing their risks, we wouldn't have had this crisis, frankly.
And mitigating the risk. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. A pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for watching. That is our show. That's Frank Islam from FY Investment Group wishing you a great week.